Hello again, everybody. This is Mr. Everything, and I'm coming back at you with another Pirates of Drinax RPG recap. This is episode 4's recap. There was actually a lot happening in episode 4. It didn't seem like it. It didn't seem like there was a lot of stuff happening. There was quite a bit happening. So let's go over this and get you caught up to what's happening in the RPG. Those of you that don't know what the RPG is, I play Traveler, Mongoose 2nd Edition, every Thursday night with a group of guys. We play around the table, we record it, we upload it, we live stream it to Twitch, and we also upload the recording to YouTube. And you'll probably get that recording. You can get that recording live. Sometimes that doesn't capture the entire thing. So what I do is I upload from Twitch to YouTube a day or two later, as well as, because I just did that today, as well as I do the recap. So that for those of you that missed the game and you don't have the time to sit and watch the game, or you're not one of those that like to sit through a 4-hour session of a role-playing game, you just want to hear the cliff notes, that's what these recaps are about. And it's also good for the players. If the players watch the recaps, they can kind of grasp some of the stuff that they didn't know about that I know about in the background, because I'm going to kind of reveal what's behind the curtains sometimes. And sometimes I'm going to try not to, but sometimes I do. And it'll allow the players an opportunity to kind of get a better feeling of what's happening in their universe. And also, it's okay if I spill something or if I do a spoiler alert or something like that, because I trust that my players can differentiate between what their character knows and what the player knows, and they don't use player knowledge in the game. It's almost like if you ever played a D&D module and you've played it once already, but then you go over to a different friend's house and he's running the game and he winds up running that same module. Even though you know where all the bad guys are or where all the monsters are hidden, you don't act like you do, and you try not to use that knowledge to make decisions. You know, that's where good role playing comes in, is when you have to force yourself not to use player knowledge. I know it's in the background of your history and everything. It's in your thought process, but I'm okay with that. All right, so let's talk about how did the game start? Well, the game started with them finishing up some shopping on a world system called Palindrome. The only thing they bought was like a mechanical toolkit, because he wanted a crowbar, so he bought a mechanical toolkit. Like, I think it was a backpack. I think he bought a backpack just so he could carry all of his stuff. They have a couple of passengers. They have some people in low berths. On the way out of system, they find a shuttlecraft on the way in system. And the shuttlecraft's name was Anne. And it's 95 tons, so it's almost 100 tons, but it's too small to have a jump drive. So they're wondering, where is this thing coming from? Why is it heading in system? Blah, blah, blah. It's not coming, because they're heading to the gas giant to refuel, because they're trying to pirate people, right? And they're out there all by themselves. They said, pull over and we'll... and prepare to be boarded. And the guy said, no, F you, right? And he headed on into the planet. And the pilot figured, well, first of all, they've been out in space for about 4 days, and they're super tired of all the work they've been doing. They're carrying cargo from this mining facility that's in the asteroid belt back to the planet Palindrome. They're tired. They're grumpy. They figured they're lightweight, they're agile, they're nimble. They figured they could dodge and just fly on into the city. Well, and they had really good countermeasures on their electronics. So, but it wasn't good enough, because our players could lock on, they could fire their particle beams at extremely long range. The shuttle had no weapons, so it couldn't fire back. And they can't keep up because the player ship has 6 Gs. So eventually they knocked it out. One hit from the particle gun almost totally destroyed this scout ship. Or I keep calling it a scout ship, the shuttle, because it has like 30 points of damage, 39 points. I think it was 39 points of damage, and they did 36. It was pretty bad. And then, this is what's funny, they did a bunch of criticals and one of the criticals was in the cargo, and the cargo has radioactive materials, and part of the rules are if you do damage to the cargo, because you're punching a hole through the hull and into the cargo, so there's actually a hole, from vacuum or whatever going in there. I'm sure that the crew is scrambling to close the hull or but you don't know what other components it might be passing through. The rules dictate that the cargo might explode or do extra damage or whatever, and lo and behold, it does, right? And so they're supposed to roll like an extra d6 damage, and he rolled a 2, so they were at 38 points of damage, and the ship only has 39. So this thing's barely hanging in there, right? Just and it's leaking fuel. So the players board the ship. They find out that they rescue the crew basically because they're afraid the ship's going to blow up. So they rescue the crew. They don't bother stealing any of the cargo because it's not worth their effort to navigate the radioactivity. So they take these 2 crew members. There's only a pilot and a navigator. So they take them onto the ship. They lock them up in the cargo hold, I think, because they don't have any cargo. And they fly to, they make the jump. They don't take them back to Palindrome or anything. They just take them to the next planet with them, which is Theve. Kirsch, the Varger, gave them the passcode so they could get past the up port, because the up port, it's built into the side of a asteroid, which is pretty cool. It's built into a planetoid. The way it's carved out and the way the docking bays are and the way the bunkers on the surface and everything look, it looks like a skull floating over the planet. And so it's called the Skull. And they didn't go there, but to be able to fly past it, because it has weapons on it, you have to provide your passcodes. And Kirsch has codes. So he gives them the codes. They fly past the Skull. They land at Theve Downport. And Theve is like a dust ball. Very thin atmosphere. It's kind of like Mars. So you got very thin atmosphere, but you also have dust storms and dust flying everywhere. And so what you do is you land inside these hangar bays. All right, the doors open, you land, you close the doors to protect the ship. Also, nobody can see who's landed because all the ships are inside bays. Pretty cool. And they landed, they paid the port authority their credits. First things first, they meet the widows. The widows greet them at their bay, and they tell them what the laws are. And there's basically just to keep them informed, keep them safe, so they don't break the law. Pretty much this planet is law level 0, but that doesn't mean there's no law. The Lord's Law, because the city is split into 2 halves. It has an upper city and a lower city. Lower city is like in a canyon. The upper city, the buildings are airtight because the atmosphere is thin, and there's these like tubes that go from building to building, so you're actually walking through like tubes, maybe 20 feet wide, pretty wide, like almost streets. You could probably drive like a golf cart down the middle. All right, now these widows explain the simple laws of Black Sand City. In the starport or the upper city, or any building marked with a red flag, the laws of the lords hold sway. The lords, basically, they're just the mob bosses, you want to call it that. They don't want any murder. There's no murder allowed in the upper city. There's no weapons fire, and nothing that offends the calm and tranquility of the city. If you go anywhere else on the planet or in the canyons where the second part of the city is, and also not marked by red flags, it's law of the street. And the only restriction on the law of the street is you can't use weapons that might breach the environmental containment. And the punishment for breaking either law, there's only one, and that's death. And that's what they tell them. And they also tell them that these red flags from day to day will move from one building to the next. So it just depends on where the red flags are. The widows are all female. They are not genetically engineered, they're cybernetically enhanced. Different ones have different cybernetics, but almost all of them have like subdermal armor or neural communications or enhanced vision. They basically all can like see in the dark, and they all have armor built into their skin, and they can communicate with each other with their mind. Because they have this communicator built into their head, they don't have to talk to communicate. They can just talk. So after they get introduced to the widows, they decide, okay, it's time to get some of these repairs on the ship done. This is a good opportunity. This is a Tech 15 planet, and they'll be able to get all their repairs done that they need. So they go to the spaceport, and they or the docks at the spaceport, and they arrange for a lot of their repairs to be done. And it's going to take like 3 days for most, but 6 days for some. So they are going to have to spend 6 days in the port waiting for their ship to be repaired. So in the meantime, they decide, let's go to the Grand Hotel. And when they go to the Grand Hotel, they find out that it's like 1,000 credits per day per person. They said, oh my gosh, that's going to be 6,000 credits per person. And they've got almost a crew of 10 now that they can't afford that. So they could afford it. They got millions of credits, but they don't want to spend that much. And that's understandable. So they find a smaller hotel, which is only like a few hundred credits. And so they're like, okay, that's cool. And they get a whole floor reserved for themselves. And then they do some investigating. What they're trying to do is they're trying to find Ferric Redthane's second in command, Miria, trying to locate her to find out, basically ask her where Ferric is, because they're going to try to apprehend him or kill him so they can bring him back as a pirate to a couple of worlds so that they can get the bounty. So they inquired a few places. One of the places they inquire at is the Starport Administrative Office, just to see if she'd landed, and she hasn't landed, or she landed, with a different name or something like that. So they, but while they're inquiring, they drop a couple of names that immediately turns the clerk away because he's afraid for his life. So he stops talking to them. I think they used Admiral Derricken's name. And Admiral Derricken's one of the big mob bosses. He's like one of the biggest in this city. So they're fearful. And I think they learned that immediately once the mood changed when his name was dropped. They continue to ask around if they could locate her. Well, they assume she's not here, so they're basically going to buy their time. They're going to go visit a few shops or stores or points of interest, waiting till she does arrive, or maybe, just gradually poking and prodding. But in the meantime, they need to pick up a couple of weapons or stuff. They inquire. There are no arms dealers, or let me back up. There's no weapon shops. You can't just walk into a store and buy a gun. But there are arms dealers in town. You just have to find one or be pointing in the right direction. And about that time, they're approached by a young thug who lets them know that Admiral Derricken has heard that they're inquiring about this Miria character and Ferric Redthane, and he wants to meet them at the restaurant, the Rose Pavilion. So they go and they talk to this admiral, and he basically gives them information that of a couple of people one guy selling a laser repeater rifle, and another guy selling some Gauss pistols that he knows of, and he gives them their contact information. But then he also tells them that if he finds anything out about Miria or Ferric, that he would gladly give them information. Now, in return for that, he wants them to make Ferric disappear. He wants to make sure that he gets killed, and he doesn't want to have anything to do with it. So just make it happen, and then they're like, okay. All right, so then they go in and they visit the lower city. In the lower city, they find a guy selling Gauss pistols. They buy all 4 of his Gauss pistols. They find a guy selling laser rifles. They buy one laser rifle. They buy the laser rifle. They visit the stadium, which is the blood pit, and they find out that there are gladiators that fight, and you can bid on them. And so they find out there's a fight that night between a robot and a naked man, apparently. And so one player bids on the robot, another player bids on the naked man to see who wins. And then they visit the church. The Church of the Traveler. They just stand outside, look at it, and go, "Ooh, look, it's a church," and then they walk away. And then they go to the brain dimming area. The brain dimming is basically a house of drugs. You can buy any drug you want there. And he bought, one of the players, Kagar, I think, bought some antidepressants, which gave him headaches. And that wore off after a while. But in the meantime, they go to Tux. Tux is it's basically a bar run by a Kukri. Kukris are kind of like centaur-looking creatures. It's not being fair because it's not a actual like human and horse combo. It's their own race, but they're kind of labeled as centaurs because of the shape of the body. The owner is very polite and offers some kale tea or something. It was maybe not kale. It was like seaweed tea or something, and a kelp tea, and they drank some kind of wine. Maybe the wine was kelp wine. I don't remember on my notes, but it was kelp wine. That's right. And then there was also some tea, and they drank the tea. Helped out, and they bought some wine, or one guy bought some hard liquor. But again, everything's made out of vegetables. It's not because they don't. Everything that she has is vegan or whatever. They leave there. And they go to the house without questions, right? So when they get to the house without questions, they did the same thing. They looked at it. They see it's a halfway house. If you're down on your luck, that's where you normally go. And they said, "Okay, we're done. Let's just go ahead and leave." They didn't go in either one of these places, which I was like, "Okay." I described the outside. And then they just walked away. But on their way, when they were walking away, they got chased down by this woman from the house without questions. She was a tenant who stayed there with them. And she saw that these guys came up and looked and kept walking. And they looked like they were adventurers or they're strangers from this town or whatever. They look like they're sore thumbs sticking out. Right? So she approaches them and says, "Take me off this planet, please. Get me to some place or give me some cash so I can contact my corporation, GDCO, because she needs transportation off this world. She has no money. She came here as a liaison with a bunch of other people from GDCO, and they were all killed by assassins. I don't know why, but they were killed by assassins, and she isn't. She's survived, and she's trying to get off this planet, but she has no money. She has no way to communicate with her home corporation or her home world. So the players, after very much begging and pulling heartstrings, they finally decide, you know what? We'll take you. Because they found out that she's from a place called Pandora. And and it's in the wildlands. So they think that, one of the players thinks that it's the Wildlands game, Pandora, the planet, right? It's not. And me as a referee, I'm saying, it's Pandora from like Avatar. Yeah. That's why they need mercenaries. It's not. But who knows? We'll figure it out when they take her there. But they're planning on taking her there. Once they get this mission accomplished and they return to the worlds where Clark and Torpal, when they go to those worlds and get the reward, they figured it's just a few more jumps and then they'll have her home. So that's the plan. They're going to take her home. In the meantime, she's going to have to do working passage on the ship. I thought that was pretty cool. And then they're contacted by Admiral Derrican, who gives them their final piece of information. They have to meet him again for dinner at the Rose Pavilion. They do. And he says that he knows where she's hiding. She's actually in the scrapyard. So if you go to the scrapyard, you can apprehend her there or whatever. And so that's where the players are going to go. He asked for an additional favor. He said, "I don't have any wants or desires right now because you're already doing the one thing I need you to do. That's get rid of Ferric. So what I'll do is I'll call on you in the future for a favor undisclosed right now. So I'll ask you for a favor and you'll have to do it." And they're like, "Agreed, we'll do it." Okay, so they're on their way to the scrap heap the scrapyard, which is a bunch of ships that are like welded together to make buildings, but it's also actual ships that have been scrapped. There have been parts taken off of them and stuff like that, and they're there. They're getting ready to go in, and on the way in, at the door on the way in, they see red flags flapping in the wind. We'll see how that works. And that's where we ended episode 4. So, yeah, I told you there was a lot of things going on in this game. There's a lot of exploration of the city, learning what the city's all about, having a little fun shopping, stuff like that. Now, there's one scene that I didn't say yet, but there's one scene where the robot was actually fighting the naked man. And the naked man was butt naked with a greatsword, and the robot had like saws, circular saws for hands, and he had a hammer as a tail, and he was slow moving. He didn't move very fast, right? But this human was tumbling and rolling around and striking at the legs, because this other thing was like 10 feet tall. So he was striking at the legs with the greatsword. He was putting cuts and gashes on. You see sparks flying. He does like a somersault between his legs, and this robot has like his no waist. At the waist, he could spin 360, and he just spun around and hit the guy in the neck with his circular saw, cut his head off, and the crowd was cheering, "Yay!" It was 100 to 1 that the human was not going to win, so... All right, guys. Well, thanks for coming out and checking out this recap, and I hope you found it informative and kind of learn a little bit about the world of Thief. And we're going to play again this Thursday, and we'll see what happens. See what happens to our travelers. See if they can get this Miria Silverhand, and then eventually get Ferric Redthane, and go claim their reward. Let's find out in the next episode of the Pirates of Drinax.